Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm Irene Sunwoo, the John H. Bryan Chair and Curator of Architecture and Design. Before we begin the program, I just please ask that you silence your cell phones. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Boschel Lecture and Artist Conversation with Germane Barnes, Lisa Çakmak, and Mabel Wilson. I first want to thank our dear friends Ned and Raynette Boschel and Betsy Boschel Todd of the Boschel Family Foundation, which supports this lecture series. It is a longstanding program here at the museum intended to stimulate interest in and foster new perspectives on the art and archaeology of the ancient world. The Boschels couldn't be with us this afternoon, but would you please join me in a round of applause to thank them for making these lectures possible? Also, I wanted to thank Lisa Çakmak, the Chair and Curator of Arts of the Ancient Mediterranean and Byzantium, who's the steward of the Boschel Lecture Series. Thank you for inviting architect Germane Barnes to speak on the occasion of his exhibition, Columnar Disorder. For in fact, the exhibition's point of departure is a critical reflection on the legacy of the classical orders of architecture, the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. These are design conventions that have endured from antiquity to the present and that have helped perpetuate Eurocentric historical narratives of architecture. So Germane's project, which is in Gallery 283 in the Modern Wing, seeks to disrupt those narratives, and he does so by imagining a past and also a future in which architectural principles are shaped by the experiences of the African diaspora. And more specifically, the exhibition focuses on the column as a manifestation of a new architectural worldview that centers Black values and histories. As curator of the exhibition Columnar Disorder, it's been a pleasure to work with Germane. We are both so grateful to the supporters who made it possible to realize this very ambitious project. Devaney and Alex Washington, the University of Miami School of Architecture, the Creative Capital Foundation, the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts, and Hedgie Choi Black and Brian Black. Thank you for your confidence in architectural creativity and experimentation. Please let's also give them a round of applause. We had an amazing team here at the museum, and I just want to recognize all of them. Kate Weinberg, our boss project manager, Joanna Abajaudi, Richard Ferrer, Thomas Houston, who led an expert install team with Christine Huck, Ryan Pfeiffer, Sean Gannon, Ryan Hussoppel, Caitlin Brewitt, and Matt Byler. In conservation, Megan Creamer, Kristen Gillette, and Jillian Marcus. In interpretation and editorial, Mariel Epstein and Sheila Majumdar. Ariana Weber, our registrar, Salvador Cruz in visual design, and Bob Ciesla, Henri Aboud, and Chris Wanklin for technical support. We also had an amazing team of external collaborators, Ms. Shaniqua Brooks, who made a stunning identity column woven from hair and other materials in the gallery. And everyone, please say happy birthday to Shaniqua as well. We also had a really beautiful collaboration with the Skilled Union Masons, with the Bricklayers and Allied Craftsworkers Administrative District Council 1 of Illinois, the International Masonry Institute, and the Brick Fabricators Endicott, and also a big thank you to Nablus Woodworks, Quara Stone, and Chris Corcoran for your exquisite fabrication. So on to today's program. We're so pleased to have Germane here today to speak about his exhibition. Germane is an architect born and raised on Chicago's West Side. His practice investigates architecture's social and political agency through historical research and design speculation. And he's currently an associate professor and director of the graduate architecture program at the University of Miami. We are incredibly honored that architectural historian Mabel Wilson joins us today. Yes. Mabel is a professor of architecture and also African American and African diaspora studies at Columbia University. Through her design firm, Studio End, she was a member of the design team for the Memorial to Enslaved Laborers at the University of Virginia, a phenomenal project. And at MoMA, she was a co-curator of Reconstructions, Architecture, and Blackness in America with Sean Anderson, who happens to join us today. Her mentorship and scholarship has been incredibly transformative for the field with so many notable publications, including Negro Building, Black Americans in the World Affairs and Museums, and the recent edited volume, Race and Modern Architecture. And we are so delighted to have Lisa moderate this conversation today. Prior to joining the museum in 2020, she was a curator at the St. Louis Art Museum for 10 years, and she comes to us with expertise on the roles of women, hybridization, and identity in the Hellenistic world, and is one of my favorite colleagues at the museum. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Germane Barnes, Mabel Wilson, and Lisa Çakmak.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off, Germane. As Irene mentioned in her introduction, part of this project was inspired by the classical architectural orders, which actually we don't use the word classical anymore. We don't like that. Technically speaking, they're the Greek architectural orders as defined by Vitruvius, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how, like, the canonization of those orders and how that inspired this project, because that's sort of how Germane and I first met.
So before I answer that, can everybody give a round of applause for Irene Sunwoo, because she's the one that makes this happen? None of this happens without her, so had to say that first. So being from Chicago, studying at the University of Illinois, the way that we learned architecture was from a very Eurocentric perspective. And then when I did a residency in Italy, I was looking up North African contributions to classical architecture. And when I went through the architecture department, I couldn't find any books that actually showed me what those contributions were. So I had to go to archaeology and anthropology to actually find what those things were. And in doing so, discovered so many of the things that we learned in school were maybe a third in line to the way that things actually happened. So Africa had columns first. Greece learned from Africa. Italy learned from Greece. And so I kept asking myself, why do we never start with Africa? Why can't we prioritize Blackness? So instead of sticking with Doric, Corinthian, and Ionic, I wanted to create my own disorder based off Black identity, Black migration, and Black labor.
Mabel, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how architecture and architectural history is talked about and how it's taught, and if there is a change happening in the discipline that might be taking a less Eurocentric view to the history of architecture.
Yeah, no, I first want to just thank Irene for a really great exhibition. When you go up to the gallery, you'll see the wonderful work that Germane has done. But I think, Germane's work is emblematic. I don't know. Yeah, you could see it here. He was at the American Academy in Rome. I actually saw the project very early on because I actually happened to jury the architecture, landscape architecture and design that year. So I was aware of the kind of origins of the project. And then I became a resident fellow. And so I was there for a couple of months and overlapped with Germane and saw the kind of early evolution of that work, which was kind of questioning, what a place to be in Rome, right? Which is so much the origins. And the origins of the academy, very much connected to Chicago with Daniel Burnham and all of coming out of the exposition in 1893. And they wanted to basically make an academy in Rome to sort of solidify sort of Americans' connection with this kind of origin story of Western civilization, right? So when Germane says this is what we learn in the textbook, this literally is what you get in Architectural History 101, and it just kind of lobs off a huge part of that. But I think what's exciting, and that, it's true history is about fact, but it's also history is about the production of history, and that is always changing. as new things come on board. And I think there's a lot to be rethought, rewritten, reconsidered, as history always is, right, through exactly the kinds of questions that I think Germane asks.
Yeah, Germane, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about a couple of pieces in the show that I really love. The labor column is, I think, one that really spoke to me. I know you also have some prints that include the plans of the Pantheon. And the Pantheon, the way it's talked about in the architectural textbooks and the Roman history, art history textbooks, is that it was built by Hadrian, who was the emperor. Wrong. Hadrian was not there laying bricks, doing anything. He wasn't supervising. He was the person who happened to be the emperor at the time. What we know largely about the Pantheon is from the bricks. We know the date of the Pantheon because the bricks were stamped with the year 125 CE. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your labor column.
So the labor column is really my way of trying to encapsulate not only the efforts of people that typically go unseen, and more specifically what it means to be a Black person that is forced to migrate into different locations based off either that's materials being stolen or your homeland being at war, or in the case of someone like me, your family was taken a long time ago through the transatlantic slave trade. And one of the things that we see all the time is slavery built this country. And as slavery built this country, a lot of the people who built the bricks or toiled the soil or these things always go unnoticed. So this one is the actual labor column. And that one is in red to talk to that soil. I had a phone call with my dad a couple weeks ago, and I was just asking him questions about growing up. And I found out from him that my grandparents were sharecroppers, right, in rural Mississippi. And that some of my older aunts and uncles were out there doing the same thing with them. And that narrative is always lost. And so I try to find ways to find opportunities to bring my family into the work, and then to bring a larger conversation of Blackness and what it means in America into the work. And so the labor column really is an ode to that, and how the things that we do are so critical to this country existing, but unfortunately it's always ignored.
Well, one of the things that I love about the labor column as well is because this is a new project, I mean, these are, if you haven't been upstairs to see the exhibition, I hope you'll stick around after the program is over and go upstairs to visit, because it is really beautiful, and the first exhibition in the new architecture and design galleries. But what I loved about the preview we had yesterday is that you actually talked about who made that column. And because we are an art museum and we like to catalog things, it means that that information will live in the database in perpetuity, which is something that, like you were saying, isn't possible for the Pantheon or isn't possible for the enslaved peoples who helped build UVA. And so I think that, for me, felt like a really poignant, really meaningful contribution that your show is making.
Well, I think the cool part is, so if you do get a chance to go up and check it out, the labor column, the big one, was actually, the labor was donated. It's probably the best way I can put it. It was actually the local bricklayers union that came in. It's a teaching school, and they said, we'll happily put this together for you if you let us just take some pictures of it and use it for marketing. And I was like, absolutely, like, you can do whatever. Like, come on. I'm already over budget with this thing, so I was like, let's go ahead and make this happen. So let's do that. And then I'll never forget, Irene FaceTimed me to show me the work being installed. And I expected maybe one or two people putting it together. And there was like 20 people in the video. And I was like, Irene, why are there so many people there? And she's like, it's amazing. They all wanted to be a part of this entire thing if you're getting put together. So when you read the credits, you'll see them on there because none of that happens without them. Just like a lot of the labor was erased from my ancestors, we made sure not to erase that labor that was done for that specific column.
Yeah, which I think makes it such a powerful object in the space of the Encyclopedic Art Museum. And I would love to hear both your perspective and Mabel's perspective to this next question about what is the role of architecture in an encyclopedic art museum? We are very lucky here to have Irene, to have an entire department dedicated to architecture and design. And I think that the issues that your show raises are so important, but what do we do when your show closes? How do we still continue to talk about architecture and the labor that has gone unremarked? And what can we, in the space of an encyclopedic art museum, do differently or do better? But what do you think? What is the role of architecture in the space of a colonial institution like this?
I'll go after you, Mabel.
I don't know why you think I'm the expert. No, but I mean, in a weird way, the institution's not possible without architecture, right? Because it has to be here in order for all of the other things to have a place, literally. But I think the interesting way in which it has entered into the modern Western museum, right, because that's the lineage of the institution, is through under the rubric of genius, right? So you get the Daniel Burnhams, the McKims, the Frank Gehrys, on and on and on. But actually, those of you who are architects in the audience know it's very collaborative. Even within your own office, it's a collaboration. You have lots of people who work with you. And then outside of your office are lots of people who work, and then the people who actually build your work. So it's an incredibly collaborative, and yet it falls under, this idea that a singular genius brought this building into work. And, what I appreciate about, Germane's project, right, is his collaboration with Shaniqua, right, who just made this beautiful thing in the gallery in collaboration, right? But that's how architecture works. It's collaborative. And I think Germane really, sort of speaks to that legacy to make visible exactly those things that don't register.
Talking about our girl Shaniqua, could you talk about the identity column?
Yeah, so when we had early calls with Irene, I was throwing some crazy stuff on the phone call. It was like, hey, all of the columns are inspired by something. So we talked about the labor column being inspired by Black labor. The migration column is inspired by the actual slave ships that brought bodies across, which is why it's made out of wood. And the identity column was actually inspired by Black hair. So dreadlocks, braids, waves, all the things that we care about that unfortunately is policed. I am a part of a huge family a lot of them are here in the crowd now, and I have a bunch of sisters. And watching my mom and my aunts braid their hair when I was little, and they were all tender-headed. If you know, you know. And as a part of that, I'm sitting there watching this happen. And then there was a moment where I grew my hair out, and my mom would braid my hair so tight because she wanted me to cut my hair. She's like, please don't do this. So that column is really inspired by that. So I said to Irene, what if we made the identity column out of hair? And in typical Irene fashion, she was like, well, we'll see if this is possible or not. And then she went out and she found the incredible Shaniqua Brooks, and Shaniqua and I had a call. And on the call, I was like, hey, so look, man, I got this column, I got this crazy idea. Can you do it? And then she was like, why does it seem like you outside in the cold? It's like, because I am outside in the cold. So can you just let me know if you want to do this or if you don't want to do this? She came to the museum, she saw the work, I showed her the designs. And then from there, she made an incredibly stunning piece that she wouldn't even let me see for the last 3 weeks. It's like, I was like, it's my thing and it's yours. Like, how does this work that I can't even see my work? But I think it was the best thing for me to be surprised about that. And again, I implore you all to go check it out. It is an absolutely gorgeous piece that, in my opinion, encapsulates what it means to be Black and to have Black hair.
I literally had my next question, and it has now escaped me.
Can I ask a question?
Please, Mabel.
So, Germane, can you just share with us, how you interpret Blackness and its role in your own practice, and then the work we'll see in the gallery?
Okay, I'm gonna try to say this without getting choked up. So, it's been a rough year. My grandmother passed last year. Doing this has been an amazing distraction from that. And so when Irene asked me to do the show, I didn't ask anybody from my studio to help me, besides one person, that's Gabe, but Gabe wasn't able to make it. And so I was like, I'm gonna do this whole thing myself, because it allowed me to step away from the realities of losing my grandmother. And for me, Blackness is really family, it's community, it's all the people that came here from other towns, from other cities, to support their little brother or support their cousin or support their nephew. And so I think the dopest thing about being Black is that we get to share it with everybody. And the one thing architecture doesn't want you to do is share credit. Architecture wants you to be the single author, the person who does the napkin sketch, and you get all the accolades, which I'm like, that's not how I was raised. I was raised, if you didn't bring home food for everybody, you had to eat it in the car. Like, y'all laughing, but that's the truth. Like, in our household, that was a rule. It was everybody eats. Everybody does everything together. So you learn very early, this isn't just about you. Like, you don't get to these places by yourself. So I know I didn't get here by myself, and I try to put that in the work, which is why I'm so big on putting everybody's name on everything. No, I did not do all this shit by myself. It was not just me. My mom took me to school. My dad took me to basketball practice. My sister looked out for me. My brother looked out for me. My cousins taught me swag. My aunts taught me how to talk cool. They taught me shoes. All that stuff is what's in the work. And so for me, like, that's the craziest, awesome thing about it. I unboxed these just for today. They have never been worn before today. So I hope when you see the work, what you see is collaboration. I hope what you see is joy. I hope what you see is family. I hope what you see is lineage. And I hope what you see is tradition.
I remembered my question. You didn't just make and conceive of the pieces in the show. You also designed the show. Could you talk about the design?
So when you do shows like this, typically they have exhibition staff and exhibition designers that do all of the stuff. And so when Irene approached me, I said, there's no way I'm letting somebody else design the exhibition for my show. I'm like, if I'm an architect, I can do this. And the first thing I actually thought of, and those in Chicago will know, is the Golden Dome at Garfield Park. And that's because being a kid from the west side of Chicago, that's where I used to play basketball during the summers. That's where we used to go watch the boxing matches. That's where we go watch the car shows. That's where we go have barbecues. So the Golden Dome has a really big place in my heart. So when you go into the space, the circular design is actually inspired by that place. And then adding that to these beautiful pictures that Irene would send me in the early process. One of those was the Missy Elliott Lose Yourself video with all the columns in the background with Sierra. And then another one was the Solange photograph on her wedding day when like everybody's standing there in all white. And so I was trying to find ways to bring all those themes together to where you have these floating columns, you have these metal columns that hold drawings, you have these podiums, and all of them frame different things depending on where you stand. And so I actually took a lot of pride in the exhibition design, just like the actual objects that are also in the show.
Thank you.
Mabel, did you want to weigh in on the design?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really beautiful design, and the way in which we kind of both think of the objects, there are different ways in which you kind of have explored the idea, and there's a huge arc actually through which you've been exploring this. It's interesting because you showed us at Rome. You did not show us what was in the Venice Biennale, which was also a moment where you were thinking through the work. And I think the drawings as well. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about the drawings and also the origin of the paper, because I know about the paper and where it came from and why you're interested in. But I think it's very interesting, and I think it's kind of essential to your practice, which is. And it comes from a kind of long tradition of African Americans making do with what they have, right? The assemblage tradition of like the Betty Saar and David Hammond, my uncle John Outerbridge, who kind of worked through that. And there's a sensibility of collage and assemblage, I think, also in your work. So can you tell us about your drawings?
Yeah. So first thing is the paper, which is really important. So that paper is from Italy. And it's this really boring paper they put as a placeholder when you go get food at restaurants. So you can spill water on it, you can put your pasta on it, they just crumple up and throw it in the trash. But I thought it had a really nice texture and it looked cool when I would draw on it. So I asked the chef, can I just have a couple boxes of it? He's like, why the hell do you want this? I'm like, just trust me, I'm just trying to do something, can I have the paper? And so I'm working through the drawings on the paper, but it's all in European sizes, none of it fits US printers. So now I have to, by hand, cut everything down. My architecture nerds know the X-Acto blade process of just cutting and cutting and cutting. And so when I would finish that, I would then feed it through the printer and then do some final embellishments by hand and stuff. So it became this sort of collage drawing. And the reason I went that route is because I've always wanted my family to understand the work. I'm the only architect in my family, so why would I draw things like an architect? Instead, I'll draw things in a way that they can understand and immediately see and then resonate with. And so when I finish the drawings, we go to put it in the show, and I have this brilliant idea to have all the blinds up and to show off all the drawings. To which Irene and the staff said, you're not doing that. And I was like, well, why not? It's like, because there's too much sun coming in through the windows, it'll destroy the drawings. And so the conservation team here at the museum did their little thing with the microscopes where they look at the paper, and they found out that within the recycled paper, there were people's photographs, there was old other papers and stuff. And so these drawings are literally the history of Rome with this new blackness on top of it in the space.
Incredible. And there's also, I think, a really something on the drawings that you didn't mention, but I wanted to call out, is the text. You use text, but I remember when I first saw them, I was like, that isn't any Greek or Latin I've ever seen. So could you talk about the text?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, it's inspired by North Africa and its contributions to classical architecture. So when I was doing a lot of my research, because Irene kept telling me, Germane, you have to read more books. Germane, you have to read more books. Germane, you got to be an expert on this, so when people ask you questions, you'll be able to answer. I was like, Irene, I could just charm my way out of it. And she was like, no, you
and
need to
for everything
read.
else, there's Google.
Yeah, so she was like, no, you need to read more books. And so within that, the Berber people of North Africa had their own specific type of language, their own specific type of typology. And unfortunately, they were looked at as Black people are looked at today, and that they were looked at as savages, as transient people. The way that the Northern Europeans looked at the Berber was not a kind way. So for me, I was like, I'm gonna put this on the pedestal now. I'm gonna use their language, use their typography, and I'm gonna write all of the names in that. So on the drawings, when you go up there, you'll see it all written in Berber. So if you put out your cell phone and translate, it actually does translate to the actual text. And that was my way of saying this group of people is still as important, and their contributions are also important.
Absolutely. And I think your choice of using Berber also helps kind of unpack the flattening of the ancient Greek and Roman world. So there was an emperor from North Africa, Septimius Severus, who comes after the 5 good emperors, is from Leptis Magna. His wife, Julia Domna, is from Syria. But for some reason, our idea of ancient Rome has kind of turned into Gladiator, where if you watch the movie, people all have a British accent.
Except Denzel.
Except Denzel. Yeah.
Denzel, just Denzel.
Denzel. Yeah, so can't wait for Gladiator 2. But, in these beautiful vistas, these CGI vistas that they created of the city of Rome, it's all white marble. Also, not everything was made of marble. The Forum was largely clad in marble, but they were building with bricks and everything was painted. And so I love that about your show, how it really, in the context of an encyclopedic museum that has a collection of Greek and Roman art downstairs, it really helps call us out and just be like, hey, the way we talk about architecture writ large is kind of racist.
Yeah.
Not kinda.
Well, I would would simply say, I mean, that, people say race is a social construction, which is true. Money is also a social construction, and yet it's very real and lived, right? But there is a role in which the creation of culture and the categories of art do their work to reinforce racial hierarchies, let's say, in modern so-called Western society, for sure. And yet, those hierarchies rub up against the fact that there were always populations moving around and sharing and mixing. And, like the world, of the Homo sapien has always been complicated in terms of that. But I was just curious with Germane, can you talk about your migration column? You told us your family, had essentially migrated to Chicago, but you also encountered other kinds of migration when you were in Italy, and that's an important part of this narrative.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, a lot of this stuff is really inspired by like my upbringing. So my dad's family's from Mississippi, and a lot of times we'd be in the minivan driving down south to Mississippi, and oh my God, I used to hate it. And then my mom's side of the family's from Arkansas, and so I go down with them too. I was not a fan of that ride either. But that movement was important to understanding my own positioning here. Than to move to Italy and live in Rome. And every time I would see another Black person, it would be a migrant that was a person that was typically delivering food or some other sort of low-level labor person in that context. And it would always make me really sad because over there, this is how race is so complicated. Over there, I was American. Over there, I wasn't Black. This is American, they probably got money, let's give them whatever they want. I'd be next to a migrant that they would shoo and push away because they might be trying to sell something, or they might have their Uber Eats bag on their back, which is one of the drawings that's there. Actually, can we skip ahead a couple drawings, please? A couple slides, is that possible, or no? Right there. So in the middle, that bag, that's their version of Uber Eats. And so anytime I would see a Black person in Rome, it would be somebody delivering food. And so when I think about the migration column, it was really, how do people move through freely? Who allows people to move? How do we welcome people versus not welcome people? And when I was there, this is when the Ukrainian-Russian war was starting, and everybody was opening their doors to all Ukrainian people who were moving across. At the exact same time, there's issues happening in North Africa and Syria, these places, and nobody's opening their door to Black people. So I'm like, you're okay when these people are moving around, you're not okay when these people are moving around. How do we deal with migration? And that's why the column is actually made out of poplar wood, because we know the strange fruit song, hanging from the poplar tree. And so that entire piece encapsulates our entire narrative of what it means to be forcefully taken from a place and then moved somewhere else and then stripped of everything.
I think with that, I'm like, should I ask one more question? Mabel, do you want to ask one more question? We kind of want to leave time for everyone to ask Germane questions. So I think if I could get my colleagues to get their mics ready, and I would just ask you to don't ask your question until you have the mic in front of your mouth, because it will be hard for us to hear. But they will be running around, and Germane is happy to field all your questions.
And I just want to say thank you all for being here, all of your beautiful faces. I appreciate you.
Hi. So I don't know anything about architecture. I love this museum, but I don't really, I guess, get art. So usually I just go in and gravitate to what I think I like and what I think I understand. Going into your exhibit, I haven't been yet. Do you have any advice on how you want us to look at it? Like, is there a certain way we should move about the room? Should we be up close? Should we be far back? Like, do you have any advice on how you want us to actively engage with the exhibit?
So all that I ask is that you move through with intention. That's it. There's no specific way, there's no specific order. Certain things are highlighted in a certain way, but as long as you move with intention through the space, then your experience will be different than someone else's, and to me, that's still valuable. So it's designed in such a way that no matter where you're standing, you get a new vantage, new experience of the show. So when you walk through, just don't zoom. You know, put your hands behind your back or just walk really slowly, and then there you go.
Yes.
Oh, and don't touch the hair column.
Yeah.
Let me just say that now. Don't touch it. There is an alarm. There is an alarm. If you get too close, it will go off. And if you touch it, Shaniqua's gonna kill me. So don't touch it.
If I could just add to that, maybe don't touch anything. Right? Just don't touch anything.
As an artist, designer, placemaker, marketer, hooper, how has your design process evolved over time? And what are your thoughts about AI in design?
So I'm still pretty early in my career. So the evolution has really been more medium-based. So doing things from paper to then marble and these types of surfaces. So I think that's probably the biggest leap. As far as AI, you and I went to school together. So that's Nick Brown. I've known Nick since I was like in the 6th grade. We played AAU basketball together. And that entire time, since I've known you, we drew everything by hand. Like that's how we were taught, right? My boy Joseph's over there, he was our classmate. We drew everything by hand. So I personally minimize the use of AI only because my comfort zone is still by drawing. But I think people that do use it, as long as you have some sort of incredible way of showing sort of the collaboration and the efforts, I have no negative qualms with it, because I think people don't realize with AI, it's sourced from so many other places that as long as you're giving credit to those other artists too, by all means, go for it.
I have one up here.
Hi, Germane and everybody on the panel. I'm a sophomore architecture student currently, and I just had a question. I've never really seen any of your work yet, but I had a question about your design process. And we're about to start a project about designing an ecological center. And I just wanted to ask you what you think about how do you include community? How do you, weave the building within the fabric of an existing community, and how do you, consider all their needs and what they want for the space?
So with the work that I do, so you guys are all seeing sort of the artistic part of the architecture practice, but we do buildings too. And in that part, it all starts with community engagement. And true community engagement, where we sit down, we have real conversations, we talk with people, and we source their ideas. Because everybody in here understands space. Everybody in here understands how to move around space. So why not utilize that knowledge that people have? So my advice to you is, if you actually want to do this for a much longer time, then you have to actually ask people questions. It can't be a process of you looking at data or going on Google or looking at GIS maps and just saying, I've done the research. You have to put feet on the ground, go to people where they are, don't make them come to you, and then ask them meaningful questions. And when you ask them, you're gonna find out very quickly, oh, you all probably could be architects too if our industry and our pedagogy and our academic standards weren't so incredibly unfair to most people.
Yeah, I would add to that. I have a transdisciplinary practice, of which writing history is part of it. Having done community work, having engaged, difficult contexts like Charlottesville in quotes, you have to listen. Like, that is something that is extremely important, right? You have to hear and you have to acknowledge that you have heard someone else. That is key. And I think once you do that, you build dialogue, you build trust, and you also learn a lot. And sometimes I think that's really hard for architects to do, because you're coming from a profession of expertise where you're educated to believe you know everything. And then to be confronted, right, in a situation where, oh, maybe I don't know so much. It's really important. And I think that's a really great question that you're asking at this point, I think, in your education. So thank you for that.
Thank you. We have a question in the center right here.
Oh, I didn't know that you were here. Hi, my name is Taehyung Kim from Crosstone Company. First of all, it is our honor to work with you and create your art pieces. It's really fun work to work with you. And I have two questions. So the first question is, while producing your columns, we did a lot of search of materials and texture of the columns. And Also, we got some 3D models of the columns. My question is, 3D columns are really defining the general shape of each column. So I just wondering the process of creating those 3D models. And my second question is, even though we did a lot of conversation of how it's going to look like, but still there's a gap, there's a jump between the physical columns, the actual columns, and the 3D models and the samples we talked about. So how could you make sure yourself that this is it? This is going to be what you really want.
Got it. So everybody, that's Taeyong. Taeyong is the amazing mind that made our 3D models, the actual columns that you see in the space at Corestone. Can everybody give a round of applause for Taeyong, please? Is Eric up there somewhere? I'm not sure. Okay, well, all the columns start as sketches first, and then we jump into a program called Rhino. And I have ace number 2. His name is Gabe Sumar. Gabe wasn't able to be here, but Gabe helped translate into the actual physical model that we then turn into the marble versions that you'll see up in the show. And the catch is, there are certain rules of designing columns based off classical guidelines. And my goal was to break every single rule. So it was things like they have to be certain proportions, there have to be certain height, they have to have certain outside. I was like, okay, cool. Broke that rule, broke that rule, broke that rule, broke that rule, got it. And that's how we figured out that the columns were what they were, added to that narrative of labor, identity, and migration. So that was the first step. The second step is how do we get that into something that can actually be fabricated? And so that was the hardest part, because it's easy when you're on a 3D program. It's not hard when you have real world constraints. And that's where Taeyong was so helpful, because I was like, Taeyong, I have no idea how we're going to actually make this, but I feel like that's why we paying y'all. So as a part of that process, we were able to figure it out. And I give all credit to him and their team, in that they were able to turn our 3D model into something that was actually able to be fabricated.
Could I ask a follow-up to the fabrication question? So you or Taehan, how do you make it? Like, is there a laser beam? Is there a saw?
Oh, they got all types of crazy equipment at that place.
So like you feed the 3D model into a computer and it tells a robot
Yes.
how to, what's happening?
Can somebody give Taeyong the mic back?
So you remember we make a really big identity columns. So talking about that one first. So it's really huge. Like the height is over my height. It should be really tall. And that one we actually used AR glasses. So I'm sorry that Eric's not here. Eric's who's working at our company. He's the master craftsman, and he actually wear the AR glasses and saw the features of identity column and actually carve and curve and break to make the texture. And in case of the 3 mini columns, we 3D printed out each column, all columns, and we used our own duplicator machines to copy the shape of the 3D model that we had from Germane, and Eric he's the person who really actually made the column, and he make the texture of the overall columns and finish them in a really good shape. Yep.
Thank you. That baby y'all here, that's my niece. So.
Germane, I'd like to thank you for your beautiful inquiry, beautiful and much overdue. And I think one thing you're helping to do is liberate a lot of architectural history and art history, because we are concerned about the Eurocentric. Well, Europe is a rather recent concept. The architecture of the Greeks and the Romans, they did not think about Europe. They thought about the Mediterranean, the sea that they lived along the side of. And Greek architecture wasn't just invented in Athens. It came from Asia Minor. It came from Africa. And I'm wondering, what did you find looking at Egyptian architecture, which is in many ways an antecedent to Greek architecture?
So when I was going through that process of reading the books, I was finding so many beautiful examples of Egyptian columns that I was like, these are like the most beautiful things that I've ever seen. I think there's a set that are either at the Whitney or at the Met that I was like, I got to see these in real life. Like, there's just stunning ornament, different types of colors, all those rules we see now, they obliterated those. The papyrus order, to me, is better than any of the other three that people talk about all the time. It's just beautiful stuff. And then you start looking at places like Tunisia, huge columns, gigantic size, gorgeous. You're looking at all these other places, and then I even found one column order called the Aeolic, which is, like, to me, better than the Ionic, but the Ionic is what got put out there instead. And so this process also took me back to West Africa, where they still had columns, but it was just wood columns instead, right? And so the identity, we tried to render like wood so that it has like a bark-like quality on the outside of it, even though it's marble. And so I tried to bring all those things back into it because, as you mentioned, so much of it was looked at differently than it is now. And the people who write books, this is the funniest thing that I realized. I am not a researcher, I draw stuff. So when I was doing the research and I would go to the index, it would say, like, this is sourced from book number 1, which is sourced from book number 0, which is sourced from like 0.1. And you realize, like, oh, y'all just copied the same stuff from the persons before you, and you got a book deal out of it. But so much of it is somebody else who did it first, like 5 books before, and they just regurgitating the same stuff. So I tried to stay away from that.
We have another question back up here.
Sorry, hi. I want to ask another question. Was there a specific African civilization, maybe ancient or even recent, that inspired your work? Was there anything that really struck you, their practices, their designs, their column orders?
Can you ask that one more time, please?
Was there any specific civilization in Africa that inspired you, either ancient or modern, that their work in architecture inspired you?
Honestly, a lot of my inspiration from architecture doesn't come from architecture. A lot of it, I watch a lot of movies. I tell people this story all the time. Like, I watch crappy movies like Transformers and like Transformers 2, like stuff like that. And so when I watch these movies, I get super inspired to make architecture, which I know is weird to hear, but it's the truth. So like when I see things like Megatron, or I see the story of like the
There's a fan. There's a fan there.
You know. I mean, I'm very lucky and very blessed to have parents that when I would say things like, I want to be a Ninja Turtle, they wouldn't say, are you crazy? They'd just be like, all right, let's go buy the kid Ninja Turtle stuff. Or when the Green Ranger pulled out his dagger and he played the little flute, I was like, this is it. Like, this is the greatest thing. This is all I need. And so a lot of the work that I do is inspired by that kind of stuff. It's really just the narrative of exaggeration and disbelief. And I feel like as long as I keep that quality, the work will always have some sort of interesting twist to it, because it's not rooted in my academic process or the things I learned when I was in school. The academic part is what I just layer on top of it, so when people ask me questions, I can actually answer them.
And we have time for about 2 more questions.
Shaniqua, didn't you have a question?
Right there.
We do have a hand right here.
You may not want to answer after I ask it. I was just going to ask you, could you tell us a little about your very first job after you finished and were a full-fledged architect? You know, where you got paid for it. Yeah. and how did it make you feel? And did you feel you have to change things to get with the person who's paying you, or were you able to stick to your own, what you felt?
So my first ever architecture job where it was me as the lead designer was in a small town called Opelika, Florida. And it was a neighborhood called the Triangle. And when I moved there, we did this huge community process where we actually met with the community members, had conversations. I lived in the neighborhood where the project was happening so they can see I was actually invested in doing the work. And fortunately, I had a client that allowed us to do it that way. His name is Dr. Willie Logan. He's the CEO of the OLCDC. And his entire thing was when I said I was going to move to the neighborhood, he's like, wait a minute, you're going to move from LA to Opelika? This place has the highest murder rate in the entire country, and you moving here? Mind you, my parents were like, are you stupid? But like, it's the only way I know how to do the work. Like, I gotta be foot on the ground in the neighborhood doing the work. And so luckily, that actually has allowed me to keep doing that same type of work. So I haven't had to change anything. I haven't had to sacrifice or compromise that because I don't take projects that don't let me work that way.
And did you want to ask? Okay.
Uh-oh.
Hi, Germane.
Hi, Shaniqua.
It has been a true joy to work with you. And I do want to let people know that because a lot of artists, creatives, don't necessarily have great collaborative experiences with other people. And I am no architect by any means, but it has been such a blessing to work with you. You did give me a little bit of hard times. However, it was great intention. So thank you, thank you. But on that note, what exactly do architects do? Because, I work with my hands, I'm very tactile, and being in grad school and going to the architecture department and seeing people not really doing much of anything, I'm very much curious to know, for those of us, what exactly do architects do?
Okay, so. Okay, so I promise you I'm gonna answer that question. I promise you. But I gotta do one thing before I answer that question. Okay. I've never had this opportunity, so I just want to do something really quickly. I'm sorry, this is a time thing, AIC. Forgive me, but you gave me the mic. It's y'all fault. If you are a family member of mine, a friend of mine, somebody I went to class with, somebody I've worked with, collaborated with, somebody I speak with, can you please stand? Thank you, because you all are my family, and I just wanted to say that. Now to answer your question. I always say, as an architect, I draw things. I try to leave it at that so people just get like, oh man, he's so mysterious. All he does is draw stuff. But I mean, I think our real task is creating spaces for people to conduct their rituals, whatever those are. So I like to feel like architects are facilitators of space. That's why I tell people all the time, I'm not really interested in buildings. They don't excite me. What excites me is what people do once they're inside of those spaces. So if I design a kitchen thinking it's a kitchen and you've turned that into a space where you play spades or stuff like that, to me, that's more interesting. If I design a park and you don't use it the way it's designed, instead, that's where you have the porch tree and you hang out and everything, to me, that's more interesting. So I like to say that architects are the people that facilitate spatial interactions, which is more anthropology than it is architecture. But don't say that to architects because they think that they do magical stuff and make buildings appear. But I'm like, bro, we didn't even do that much. Like the engineers did the rest, the contractors built it. We were on a couple phone calls, we yelled a little bit, we came out, we said, oh, that looks really nice. And then we walked right back out. Like, we've had that call. I was like, yeah, nigga, that's amazing. And I walked right back out of the room. So it is what it is. But I think that's what we do. And I'm happy to be an architect to do that. because there's so many people that deserve amazing things. And I think what makes me so happy about this career is that the neighborhood that I'm from gets to be here. The neighborhood that I'm from gets to also see beautiful things. Because growing up on the west side of Chicago, shout out K-Town, is one of the best things I've ever been able to do. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, well, we are at time. I would like to thank you so very much, Germane. Thank you, Mabel, and thank you to all of you for coming. And please go visit the show.